Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by Flexecharge, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
Welcome back to the ChargePoint podcast. I'm your host, Christoph from Flexecharge. And today we're diving into a rich conversation with Pavol Magic, CEO of Zoniq. Zoniq, out of Slovakia, is leading the charge, literally and figuratively, in transforming how data drives the EV charging ecosystem. How is it so? By harnessing the power of big data and AI, they're optimizing EV charging infrastructure like never before, concretely empowering charge point operators to make smarter, faster decisions in terms of rollout and expansion. As Pavol reminds us, there are only 1 million charging stations by now, and we need approximately 9 to 10 million down the line. So, to be clear, CPOs across Europe still have a lot of land grabbing to do. In today's episode, we'll uncover Zoniq's inception, its journey, and we'll hear more about their cutting-edge technology. Pavol will also share insights on how data brokers are unlocking a new era of collaboration by enabling seamless data sharing across the e-mobility ecosystem and beyond. After all, and finally, we'll get a thorough introduction and summary to Zoniq's latest report called The State of Public EV Charging in Europe 2024. It's an ambitious piece of research that they have created with the support of many CPOs around Europe. So plug in, power up, and get ready for episode 9. Welcome everyone to the ChargePoint podcast and to another very interesting conversation. We have a special guest today, Pavol Magic, another interesting and key stakeholder within the EV charging industry. So welcome to the show, Pavol. Can you please take us back to where your journey started and how it took you to Zoniq today?
Hi, Christoph. Thanks a lot for having me. So the journey started quite a while ago, much longer than I would like to admit. But originally I was more on the side of marketing communications. So I was working in PR, mostly for technological clients, etc. But then I took a turn in my career and wanted to focus more on actually building stuff. So I became a product manager at a GPS navigation provider called Zoniq. And I was in charge of building their mapping platform. And one of the projects I started and ran was data collection and monetization. And since we had quite a lot of users around the globe, they were producing a lot of data. So I got very intrigued in how we could actually utilize this amount of data to answer questions that we had about the real life, about mobility of people, about urban environments. So I wanted to focus more on that. And so after leaving Zoniq, I started focusing more on traffic analytics and location intelligence. Together with one of my co-founders, we were doing this for quite a while. We've been doing traffic analysis for real estate development projects. We did retail chain optimization for Shell in Central Europe and many other similar projects. And so yeah, that was like the initial spark. I got really interested in the world of data and what they can provide and literally like answer a lot of the questions and help make the world a better place. Although it sounds like a big cliche, that's how it started.
Great. So, and that took you to the creation of Zoniq. So can you tell us a bit about the inception of the company, maybe the product market phase you went through? I think those parts, this digression on the entrepreneurial aspect are also very exciting. How you came to the current value proposition, who are your customers? Let's hear it all.
Okay, so like a lot of big or good businesses, it all started by chance. We were approached by ZSE, which is the local representation of E.ON here in Slovakia. And at the time, they were looking for new sites for their charging stations in one of the cities here. And so we did it as a custom project. And obviously, back then, the whole EV charging space was just starting to scale. So we decided...
which year are we talking about here? Just to get some dates.
Like it wasn't that far ago, but it was like 2019, 2020, I believe. Yeah. And yeah, it was like wasn't the initial, like there's a lot of people that we know that are in this space for much longer, right? So like 2010. So we're just the newcomers, definitely. But still, like for an industry that is this young, 4 years is quite a lot already.
It is. A lot has happened since 19, I can confirm. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. So please, go on.
Yeah, definitely. And so we did this research, and we wanted to see whether there will be a potential for the scale, whether this is in fact the future. And we found that there's not only one, but there's obviously many potential customers or many companies that would require this type of service. So we decided to focus 100% on that. And so we found that originally we were called Mobilize, but over time we rebranded to Zoniq. And so that was kind of like the very, very initial very initial spark that we had. Afterwards, like I said, we started developing it more as a product. So we needed more inputs from the actual market. So naturally, what we did was we started reaching out to companies, mainly in Western Europe, so like Netherlands, Germany. So we wanted to have like this sweet spot because Nordics was already quite developed, and South and East was relatively underdeveloped and just starting the journey. So we thought like the markets like Benelux and DACH will be kind of like in the middle, and they will require more of these services and more analysis and to gain an edge against their competitors. At the time, we met Albert Lievense, who became our advisor. And he introduced us to Fastnet, and that was... Luckily for us, it was one of our first clients, and we've been working with them pretty much ever since. And of course, this was a great reference to have for an early stage startup. And also it provided us a lot of learning points on how CPOs actually think about deploying their infrastructure and growing their network. And from there, it kind of went pretty quickly. Like looking back, it seems quite quick. At the time, it felt much slower. So like I said, it's a very new, very young industry. So most of the players are really keen on talking, trying to gain an edge, trying to position themselves as the industry leaders. So pretty much whoever we reached out to, they wanted to talk. And after we showed that we really have something and it's just not a simple presentation, but there's really a foundation to the product and to the models that we developed, then the talks continued, and we were able to get more and more clients on board.
Yeah. I can see interesting, kind of organic journey, very natural. Working on the adjacent, oil and gas or energy provider part. I can see that, of course, you are location experts. So the value proposition in short, can you serve it to us, short and sweet?
So I like to joke about it that we developed the closest thing to a crystal ball to understanding public EV charging demand. Because for home locations or even business locations, so companies and company fleets, it's relatively easy to predict what's going to happen, right? But for public charging, whether we're talking destination and especially on the go, it's very difficult. Of course, there are some patterns that come from traffic mostly, but there are outliers, there are other aspects that affect this. So we have to be very careful, and we have to introduce like very detailed data into our models to understand the current dynamics of the market and forecast what's going to happen in the years to come. Because obviously this is a long-term game, so the charge point operators need to be able to estimate what's going to happen at least to 2030 or ideally to 2035, so they can build their business case and compute the ROI.
Yeah, isn't it the case in most places that it's about 10 years licenses or authorization or like deals they do with landlords on locations? Is it correct?
Yeah. So it's essentially a real estate development business, right? You either lease or buy a piece of land and then you develop it to get some money out of it. And so it just happens you are building EV charging infrastructure. So that's the means to generate revenue for you. It's mostly defined by the lease agreements that they have or the contracts that they get with their B2B partners or even governments.
Yeah. So when we talk about the data that goes into your crystal ball, right? So the crystal ball can show the results. There's something, a couple of episode number 7, I had a very good talk with Shoshana Pato from the RAP, and she was mentioning this European publication or available, a map which is available on European level, which is showcasing or at least giving insight on the grid availability, because we talked about grid availability, grid congestion, and so on. So I thought when we start to discuss, this must be also interesting and important to include in your data. So can you tell us about how you see those data and what you know of them and how you use them if you're already doing it?
So data availability in general is quite terrible, to be honest. And that's actually one of our biggest selling points, right? You do have markets like the UK or the US, or sometimes even for example, Spain has pretty good traffic data, but having all the data sets necessary to understand the demand and actually calculate specific kilowatt hour forecasts, you need a lot of it. So that's why we're trying to be as scalable as possible. So that means we need to be using the least amount of data sets that are able to explain the utilization. Because the more data we introduce, the more difficult it becomes for us to scale the product to the global market, right? And that was the initial goal, to have a product that will be available worldwide. So what we ended up with is population data that is relatively easy to get, although not that easy to actually process and use in the final product. Then you have points of interest. There you can either rely on open data sets or specialized providers and license the data. Still, there's a lot of cleaning, a lot of preparation of the data, because it's a mess. Like when you, for example, go with OpenStreetMaps or even Overture Maps, which are built on OpenStreetMaps, it's not easy to do. And of course, the data availability changes market by market.
Can you imagine?
Then we have existing charging infrastructure that we totally rely on a specialized provider, which is a Dutch company called Eco Movement. We've been very satisfied with them so far, although even there, the accuracy and the completeness of the data set is not 100%, because like we already established, it's a relatively young and very dynamic industry. So the changes happen so fast that it's close to impossible to have 100% accurate data set. And the fourth data set, which is the most complicated, is the traffic counts. So since we actually started with this and traffic analysis was one of our key components, we decided to develop our own traffic models. So we're able to compute relatively accurate traffic counts for any road segment anywhere in the world. And that's one of our key advantages, because there's very little companies that actually has this kind of capability. So it was quite essential for us to have this. So there we again rely on external providers for data from cell phones and cars and any other device that has a GPS module, and then we combine it with data from the governments, so either from statistical counts or automated counters. And using our models, we're able to estimate annual average daily traffic, so how many cars per day drive on a particular road segment. So all in all, these 4 data sets are already like quite substantial, and it's very difficult for a newcomer or a charge point operator to just amass this amount of data and to prepare it and clean it and like have the models ready. It's very difficult. And then, of course, you have to account for the industry-specific data sets, like the EV penetration. Then you have like already it's already like very, very complicated. And the last piece of the puzzle, which is the most difficult to obtain and the most difficult to understand and prepare, and that's the actual utilization data, where we rely on multiple sources. So we do have data partners. Some of our customers actually share their session level data with us, which is quite invaluable for us, because then we can take availability data from providers like Object and train our models to understand the utilization patterns, and combined with all the other data sets that we have, we can train this crystal ball. And like you already mentioned, there are other data sets that we have to take into account, because what we've been doing mostly so far is just assessing the revenue potential of the location. But we also have to assess the feasibility and the cost side of things. And for that, the electrical grid data is completely invaluable and essential.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So hopefully those maps, which I understood were relatively new, and it's great that it's being pushed to be available. I can imagine it's going to be pretty invaluable for you to go, as you said, beyond the revenue potential to really talk about feasibility. Interesting to follow. Yeah. So if we look at the data you would need from a CPO to deliver the best result possible.
So the first level is aggregated availability data. Like, this is something that we can get on a scale. We're licensing this data, which means that you either have like, yes, this charger was occupied, or what percentage of the time this charging station was occupied. So that's the least granular data that you can get. And I wouldn't say it's the easiest to get, but still you can get it on the scale. Then you have the more granular data that is tied to a specific location, maybe like in 15-minute intervals, right? So whether the charging station was occupied or not. And then you have the very, very granular data, which is session level data. So what time a session started, what time it ended, how long the vehicle was connected, how much electricity was actually dispatched, so in terms of kilowatt hours, and like if there are some additional attributes that we can get, then definitely they're useful. For example, whether the charging station was operational. Because obviously that affects the utilization rate quite significantly. If the charging station is not operational, it can skew the results of the model. But we need this information. We need to have it. And then you have, like, ideally speaking, some sort of anonymized ID for a user. That would be like extremely granular. But what that would allow us to do is identify heavy users, such as taxi drivers, because then again, they skew the results of the utilization quite significantly. So what we typically do is we take away these outliers and we look at the general public for the analysis and for the training of the models. And then we introduce them back to the data set to identify these locations where these outliers, so the heavy users, can be present. Because like the real world is still something that is very different from the digital one. So being able to accurately describe with hard data what is happening in the real world is very difficult. But when you do it on a scale, good enough results are what they are. They're good enough. And they're they're quite better than what CPOs have right now, because a lot of times they have to rely on their own estimations or on the findings of the business development people that they have on the ground. Of course, the best way is to combine all the approaches, us providing the data and the analytics and the estimates and forecasts, then having somebody internal, some analysts, process it and adjust the results based on their particular experience and their strategy and their brand, which is quite important as well. And then have a business developer validate the data on site. So, of course, if you want to develop a site that is worth €1 million or €2, then a thorough preparation and analysis is in place, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but that takes us to the topic of freeing the data and making sure this data is available from the CPO side, right? And of course, depending on the technology stack, it might always be as easy as we would hope to get the data out, right? I think we talked about that, and that's been also the driving force and the vision behind, if we talk briefly about what we do at Flexecharge with the OCPP broker, which we announced last week. That is what we're trying to help. So can you maybe talk a bit about your vision around open data and data sharing culture, maybe also referring to previous projects that you worked on? Tell us about how important data is for you, and what's your vision philosophy around this?
I've always been an advocate of open data and opening up as much data as possible. Like years ago, I had this idea in mind that if a couple of subjects on the market got together, they could create a very accurate traffic counts almost in real time. And it's not that difficult to do when you think about it. However, it's more of a political subject, and everybody's just trying to keep their business running. And like sometimes it's just people being overprotective of what they do without actually seeing the opportunities that would be available if they opened up a bit. So from my perspective, open data brokers, and data aggregators are completely essential to what we do and for innovation to actually happen. Because if everybody just keeps their data to themselves, then we cannot progress. Like that's, again, one of the things that we're able to do because we're a neutral subject on the market, and we can go to multiple CPOs and ask for their data and combine them with all the other data sets that we need to create our crystal ball, right? I just can't imagine a particular CPO going to other CPOs and asking for their data, right? They do have access to some of it to some extent, but it's in the end, it's not their core business. Like developing an internal solution similar to ours would take them years, and they would still not be able to reach the same levels of accuracy that we're able to have. And again, I would just like to stress how important it is to have data aggregators and data brokers active on the market, because even if we ourselves wanted to collect all the data that is necessary for us to produce the final result, it would not be feasible. Like we wouldn't be able to do what we do at the moment. And we're using like multiple partners for that provide us data.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Free the data. Great. Your company published a few months ago a very interesting study, a report about the state of charge in Europe. Can you talk us through this report? Like, why did you do it and how it was created, and maybe share some of the main takeaways until we get our hands on the full version for those of us who haven't read it yet completely?
So the idea was to get the essential data and analysis to the stakeholders on the market. Mm-hmm. Because again, like our mission is to enable and speed up the transition to electric transport or electrified transport. And when we were starting and when we were looking at the industry, we were relatively able to identify the key players on the market, but it was very difficult to find even like the basic data. Yes, you have the sources like the European Alternative Fuels Observatory, which has quite a lot of it, and was also very, very useful for us in the beginning, as well as producing the report. So that's an invaluable source of data. But we wanted to go further and provide a look on the state of public EV charging in Europe as a whole. You can find reports for some markets, of course. You can find reports that are looking at EV charging as a whole, but there was no comprehensive report on the state of public EV charging in Europe. And so that was like... that was something that we wanted to do. We were thinking about like selling it because that's typically what companies do, right? You have a consultancy that takes a bunch of analysts, takes a bunch of other stakeholders and partners, and they create this fancy report that is like really big and also pricey in the end.
Yes.
But in the end, we decided against it, and we decided to give it away for free because we wanted to educate the market. And I know it's not perfect. It's even described in the foreword. We took a very startup-ish approach to it. So we wanted to create the report, then we will issue an updated version of this one. And every single year, we want to do it better, of course. And with this edition 0, let's call it, we wanted to test the market, test the response from the market, whether there's going to be interest from the side of partners to participate on it, interest from the market to actually read this kind of report. And I must say the response was absolutely overwhelming. It was so fantastic. I was very surprised that like a relatively unknown brand, a relatively unknown startup from Slovakia just reached out to the industry leaders. Of course, we already knew quite a lot of them, so it was easy, but we reached out to CPOs that we haven't been really in touch with as well. And we were very lucky that they decided to participate. So all in all, we had like a lot of industry leaders like Fastnet or ENBW present and participating in the report, which was great. Also, the downloads were like tremendous, like seeing how many people actually downloaded the report and engaged in a conversation with us and provided feedback, which is quite valuable as well. So like, yeah, it was very, very nice.
Fantastic. Yeah. And are there some highlights you would like to share, maybe just a few minutes as a last part of this report? Surprising findings, amazing findings, disappointing, optimistic, or hopeful findings? Tell me.
Yeah, like there were a lot of surprises, of course. One of the key ones were the regional differences. Like that was expected, of course. Like in any kind of new developing market or industry, you do have regional differences, and they typically go along the lines of the GDP. So the wealthier regions have higher adoptions, the poorer regions have lower adoptions, right? So that's completely expected. But looking at it as a whole, as a Europe, the differences were substantial. Like I wasn't believing my eyes, like how big of a difference it can be, both in terms of the deployment of infrastructure as well as in the usage of charge points. There were also very strong regional differences within markets, right? So, like from a continental perspective, seeing how Spain is lagging behind was very surprising. Like we're always talking about Spain and Italy being a bit of laggards compared to how automotive they are. But in terms of numbers, they're like way behind pretty much everybody, except some markets in Balkans, right? But the differences are huge. Regionally, for example, Italy, it was kind of funny because there's like jokes like every map of Italy looks like this, and you have like the most developed north, the somewhat developed middle, and then the least developed south. And not surprisingly, it was like that in EV charging as well. So that wasn't really a surprise. What was kind of funny to see was the differences in usage, or like how individual markets like perform. For example, in Austria, Vienna was one of like the least developed regions, whereas in the neighboring Central European markets like Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary, the capital regions are the most developed, like by far, right? So there are still like these differences, like when you have to really think about it, like why is this happening? Because you wouldn't really think there will be a deviation to the norm, because obviously capital regions typically have the highest GDP, so also you expect to have them like the highest proportion of electric vehicles and the highest utilization as well. That's not the fact in Vienna, so that was also surprising.
No, I'm asking, were there interesting findings in terms of the acceleration of DC charging versus AC charging in the penetration?
Yeah, so like we're still growing in output powers. So whereas 2 years ago, or even like last year, the 150 kilowatts were the norm in fast charging, now we see many more 300 kilowatts appearing. So that wasn't really surprising, of course. Everybody's talking about the long charging times, which isn't the case, but like the perception of the public is very important in actually having a good adoption of electric vehicles. So CPOs are trying to accustom that. And so they're deploying faster charge points. You also see the emergence of megawatt charge points as well. So truck charging is starting to become a thing, also on the public side of things, because private truck charging is already here, and it's relatively easy to do if you have the money, whereas public is much more difficult, but you have like specialized CPOs like Milans, so we will see more of these in the next year, definitely. For the AC and DC splits, like AC still has its role in charging, especially in home charging, and so like overnight or during the day when you're at work. However, like we have to be very careful with the ratios, because as we can see in the Netherlands, when you deploy a lot of ACs, they just eat up the available capacity of the grid, and then it's very difficult to go from there. So deploying DCs is very difficult. Even like getting any amount of capacity is very difficult, and that was already covered in your episode 7, which I definitely recommend. It was very good.
Thank you.
So yeah, that was also like one of the key findings. Super. And probably like the biggest. It's not even like a surprise, but we were kind of like expecting, especially the Nordic markets and the West European markets, to kind of like be already beyond the land grab phase, which is not the case. The land grab phase continues to this date, and it will continue, which on the other hand makes sense because the scale of the problem is absolutely huge. Like when you think about it, right now there's 1 million charging stations in Europe, right? And we need close to 10 million. So that's like a rough estimate, somewhere between 9 to 10 million. So the whole market is going to grow tenfold from now until 2030. So we have to deploy like thousands of charge points every week in Europe to be actually able to accommodate the growing demand.
Yes.
So
sums it up.
Yeah. Exactly. We do have a lot of work ahead of us.
There's a lot ahead, and but luckily things are falling into place. Technologies are maturing. The tools are there, like yours, for finding the locations, and then again pointing a bit back at us, then optimizing each location with load and energy management and beyond your revenues and so on. There's the tools are there, but it's execution. And improving the business cases, right? And look at feasibility all the time, because we need to find spots for those 9 million charging stations, as you say. Yeah, fantastic.
Could I agree more?
Sorry,
I just say that I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So great. I think now you really teased us on this report. For those of you haven't looked at it, downloaded it. I will put the link in the show notes, and I'll also put the link to Pavol's profile if you want to connect and hear more about the Zoniq, or just exchange with another EV charging enthusiast and thought leader. Thank you a lot, Pavol, for today. It was a pleasure talking with you, and looking forward to keeping in touch and talking sometime.
Thank you, Christoph. Pleasure was all mine.
That's a wrap for episode 9 of the ChargePoint podcast. What a fantastic conversation with Mr. Magic from Zoniq. We explored how Zoniq is leveraging big data and AI to empower ChargePoint operators so they can make smarter decisions and turning the daunting task of scaling infrastructure into an achievable data-driven strategy. Pavol's reminder about the journey ahead, scaling from 1 to 9 to 10 million charge stations that Europe needs, truly drives home the scale of the opportunity and challenge before us all in the EV charging industry. We also discussed the crucial role of data brokers in fostering collaboration and why seamless data sharing is the key to unlocking the full potential of the e-mobility ecosystem. Service like Zoniq only gets better as data is allowed to flow freely and shared between the CPO and Zoniq. Pavol said, connection is power in the space, and we couldn't agree more here at Flexecharge. It was great to hear some highlights from their latest reports. The State of Public EV Charging in Europe 2024. As said, it can be found on the website, and it's absolutely free of charge, which is a great gesture from Zoniq. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode of the ChargePoint podcast. Whether you are a CPO, an e-mobility enthusiast, or someone shaping the future of EV infrastructure, there's always more to discover here. If you have suggestions for future guests in the EV charging or energy space, drop us an email at hello@flexicharge.com. Until next time, stay charged and stay connected.